the Sloth and Indolence, the Party of the 90s workshop. And our guest this afternoon is Utah Phillips. Let's hear it from him.
The Ford Hunger March, 1934. It's coming from Maurice Sugar, founder of the National Lawyers Guild and a great radical lawyer. Goodman, Cheney, and Crockett, Justice Crockett, a black congressman, was a member of that firm. They represented every major labor union during the 1920s and 30s in Detroit, Michigan. And every now and then, Maurice Sugar would go to a hunting camp in the Upper Peninsula to kind of cool off. And they would get a buck. And they would make a venison stew and sell it for $1 a plate for the Ford Hunger Marchers. And that got to be known as the buck dinner. And they've been doing it now for this is the 56th year, and the whole left in Detroit gets together, and it's the only time they do. It's a wonderful bunch to go and sing for, because they all know what you're singing about, you know. This is Maurice Sugar's song. I'll teach it to you. I'm spending my night in a flop house. I'm spending my days on the street. I'm looking for work, but I find none. I wished I had something to eat. Kind of a basic song, you might say. Oh, soup, soup, they gave me a bowl of soup. Soup, soup, they gave me a bowl of soup. Think you can handle that? You out there in Radio Land, Dad, stop reading that funky Sunday paper. Ma, stop washing them dishes in that Tupperware tub. Tell them squalling brats to hush up. Gather around your radio and sing along with old Huter. Oh, soup, soup, they gave me a bowl of soup. Soup, soup, they gave me a bowl of soup. I worked 20 years in a factory. I did everything I was told. They said I was loyal and faithful. Well, now I'm out in the cold. Oh, soup, soup, they gave me a bowl of soup. Soup, soup, they gave me a bowl of soup. We're gonna need a lot of these old Depression favorites damn fast, you know, as we tread the thin line between misfortune and calamity. What might that be? Well, if the president was to be walking by the reflecting pool in Washington and accidentally trip and fall in, well, that would be a misfortune. If somebody was to happen by and pull him out, now that would be a calamity. Oh, I saved $15 with my banker to buy me a car and a yacht. I went down to draw out my fortune. Hey, this is the answer I got. You guessed it. Soup, soup, they gave me a bowl of soup. Soup, soup, they gave me a bowl of soup. Yes, one more time. An empty car pulled up in front of the White House and George Bush got out. Will Rogers said that about Calvin Coolidge, you know. How times change. That man gives opportunism a bad name. Abby Hoffman said that about Tom Hayden. Oh, and where is Abby when we need him? Where is Abby when we need him? Jesus Christ. I'm up at the Button Works in Nevada City. They're making up Abby's last button for me. The one Abby Hoffman was wearing when he was found dead. It's a button just says yes, and it has an international no sign over the top of it. That's Abby Hoffman, a true. No fooling. I was in Washington, D.C. lately. We call it Mordor, where I come from. Have you ever sat in the galleries in Congress and watched your congresspersons at work? I found out 60% of our congresspersons are lawyers. Can you feature that? Seem to be lawyers making laws is about like doctors making diseases. Take my word for it, those of you who love sausage and law would do well not to watch either one being made. Well, like old Idaho Blackie, that old wobbly up in Post Falls, Idaho, said, Uter, if elections could change this system, they'd be against the law. Man was a sage. He said, yeah, if God would want us to vote, he'd give it as candidates. Think about that. Oh, I fought in a war for my country. I went out to bleed and to die. I thought that my country would help me. Hey, this was my country's reply. Oh, soup, soup, they gave me a bowl of soup. Soup, soup, they gave me a bowl of soup. Whenever I get into a moral quandary, which is not a political quandary, less than moral these days, I tend to take reference to my elders, people who led those extraordinary lives that cannot be lived again. So Claire Sparks said years ago, the long memory is the most radical idea in America. Huh? You think, isn't that what a festival like this is a large partly about, is the long memory? What folk music is about, dealing with the long memory? Why, you stop somebody on the street and ask them what happened week before last, they can't tell you because we're homed in on this week's crisis. Isn't that true? You know? But that long memory is chopped up just so that it's like a friend of mine who says, he comes to my shows, he says, you sing a lot about the past. You can't live in the past, you know. I figured anybody who tells me I can't live in the past is trying to get me to forget something that if I remembered it would get him in serious trouble. You think about that way too? Yeah. I go outside and I say to my friend, I go outside, I pick up a rock and I bring it back in. I say, this rock is older than the oldest song you know, and I can drop it on your foot. Past didn't go anywhere, did it? No, sir, it's right here, right now. Is this too abstract for you?
No!
I do take reference to my elders then, as we all appropriately should. Oh, hell, all during that Gulf War, you know, I was thinking so hard on old Hank Penny. It's appropriate remarks for a radio show. I love the idea of the radio program up here, the whole station. And I support strongly community and public radio, you know, the putting the tools, the people's airwaves in our hands, because there's ours, damn it. I was sitting on a park bench sharing it with Hank Penny many years ago in San Diego. Hank Penny was a storyteller and a banjo player, guitar player, and an early Grandpa Jones in the earliest days of radio. He told me that, sitting on the park bench, that he had been on the first coast-to-coast radio broadcast in the history of the known universe. He said it emanated from Camden, New Jersey, and the sponsor was Standard Oil of New Jersey, and the master of ceremonies was the great Will Rogers. Well, Hank Penny was tuning his banjo waiting to go on the air for the first time, and he overheard a conversation between Will Rogers and the president of Standard Oil, who was there for that historic occasion. And Will said, now this is the first time anybody's going to talk to millions of people at the same time. Caesar couldn't do it, Alexander couldn't do it, but I'm about to do it. So it better be damned important. What do you think I ought to talk about? Well, Will, the president of Standard Oil said, you probably should remind the people out there in Radio Land that Standard Oil of New Jersey is a service company. Well, Will Rogers didn't know what that meant. He walked around, thought about it for a bit. They put him in front of the microphone, threw the switch, and there he was, alive in front of all of America and parts of Mexico and Canada for the first time in history. He said, ladies and gentlemen, I've been asked to offer a few remarks about Standard Oil of New Jersey, especially as regards their policy of service. Now, I didn't know what that meant, but I cast my mind back to my daddy's old ranch in Oklahoma, where we had a big stud bull. And the farmers would bring their cows by for service. Now, I didn't know what that was. I said to my daddy, Daddy, what is this service we've been offering? And my daddy said, you're too young to know about that, son. Nature will provide that information in due course, and by the time you got it, be so glad you got it, you won't care where it came from. I always tell little kids that. Well, I was disappointed. But then my daddy went away on a selling trip. He sold lightning rods part-time for a firm out of Des Moines, Iowa. I was up at the big house alone because the hired hands were out stretching wire. And a neighbor came by leading a cow asking for service. I thought, well, this is my opportunity to find out what that might be. I run him into the pen, closed the gate, climbed up onto the top rung, sat down to watch. My neighbor said, "Get down off there, son. You're too young to know about that now." He sent me packing. I was sore disappointed. But I knew that around back of that pen was a high board fence, and in that fence was some knotholes. I snuck around quiet. I rolled some logwood, some cordwood up against the back of that fence, clambered up on it, put my eye at one of them knotholes, and I peered through. And ladies and gentlemen, I saw right there in front of me exactly what it is Standard Oil's been doing to the people all these years. You see what I mean? Oh, when I die and I get up to heaven, St. Peter will let me right in. He can tell by the soup I was fed on, I was unable to sin. Oh, soup, soup, they gave me a bowl of soup. Soup, soup, they gave me a bowl of soup. Yeah, thank you. Let me tell you a story about elections. It's from an old friend by the name of Herb Edwards, a giant Norwegian logger, immigrant to the Pacific Northwest. Lived as an old man in a little tiny apartment in West Seattle. He didn't live badly, but not as well as he should have, considering the work he had done with his life. He filled the kitchen door. I mean, that's how big a man he was, even at his age, in his 80s. He would have Tom and Jerry parties and have all of his old cronies in every Sunday. I still don't know what's in them Tom and Jerry's, but he would stand in the wedge himself in the kitchen door so he wouldn't fall over. That's how big he was. And then he would hold forth in that broad Norwegian accent of his, which I would not dare to try to duplicate, and talk about his times. He said they used to boom into Spokane, Washington, and other western towns on the freight trains. Jungle up in the flops. Wait for something to open up in the forest, in the mines, and the wheat harvest down on the Palouse. When the weather changed, they'd go down onto the street, Trent Avenue. There were rows of little shops there called labor sharks. Labor shark was kind of like Manpower or Kelly Girl, where you buy a job and get cheated. Times don't change, do they? Well, you go down and give the shark $4. It entitled you to a job up. Say you're putting a new mine shaft in the Coeur d'Alenes. You'd use up your road stake to get up there. You'd work for a month, get paid, and laid off. Why? Because the foreman on the job was splitting the labor fees with the shark in town. That's perpetual motion, they called it. Got one guy going to the job, one guy on the job, one guy coming back to town to buy another job. See? He said in 1910 they started building union hiring halls in all the towns through the West to control the conditions of their labor. That was the Industrial Workers of the World, the IWW. It's Wobblies. It's the union I belong to now for 37 years. I'm glad you know of it. Well, the union hall over in Missoula was burned down by the law. The law tore down the one board for board in Spokane. So the Wobblies went out on the street onto Trent Avenue, Herb said, and they put up soapboxes. Got up on those soapboxes, started windmilling, started street speaking. They'd set up across the street from the Starvation Army. Starvation Army was over there with their band. They'd be Bible banging, Jesus preaching, telling these working people if they give what they had to the Lord, they get pie in the sky by and by. My, that's a lie. Well, they were good at it. People would flock across the street to join a fighting union. They were so good at it that the city turned around and passed an ordinance against free speech, which they did in Fresno, and did in Sacramento, and did in San Diego, all over the West. They passed ordinances against speaking openly on the street. Applied to everybody except the Salvation Army. Well, the Wobblies said that's intolerable. The state can't give you free speech. The state can't take away free speech. You're born with it, like your eyes, your ears. We all know that, don't we? Huh? Like Campbell said, freedom is something you assume. Then you wait for somebody to try to take it away from you. The degree to which you resist is the degree to which you are free. Huh? So they said, all right, we're going to resist. They sent out a call to anybody cut loose from a job. Called them into town for a free speech fight. filled up the town there in Spokane, went down to Trent Avenue, put that soapbox up in defiance of the law, built a line 4 blocks down and 4 blocks up, and every one of those booming workers took their turn on that soapbox. Had time enough to say, fellow workers, when they got arrested. That was the idea. The Finns were the tough ones. They were socialists when they got here. Finnish worker had learned enough English to say, fellow workers, and if the cop wasn't right there, he'd say, where's that damn cop? Well, they filled up Fort Wright, and they filled up the city jail and the county jail and the high school gym, grade school. Every square inch of public space was full of busted boomers. But then the city had to feed them. The tax burden was enormous. Taxpayers balked. They said, we're not going to spend our hard-earned loot to feed that bunch of grimy grifters down in the slammer. So the city had to change the ordinance, and they won. And it didn't take any ballot boxes, and it didn't take any political parties. It's called direct action, and comes to us highly recommended.
Yeah.
Well, now, Joe Hill was on the docks in San Pedro, immigrant Swede. He got wind of the Spokane free speech fight. He took an old hymn tune and he put a new set of words to it, fired them off through the mail up to the branch secretary there of the union, a fellow named Haywire Mac McClintock, the guy that wrote Big Rock Candy Mountain and Hallelujah I'm a Bum. Well, they got together a little nucleus of an IWW band with T-Bone Slim. They went down on the sidewalk. They hid in a doorway across the street from the Salvation Army. This time they used a shill. You know what I mean? Somebody uses carny tricks to build a crowd. They dressed one of the members up like a banker. And he'd walk down between the Sallies and the Wobblies. And suddenly he'd start yelling, help, I've been robbed! Help, help, I've been robbed! Everybody would run across the street. What's the matter? What's the matter? When he got the crowd together, he yelled, I've been robbed by the bosses, fellow workers. And then he talked to them for about 10 minutes, and then they leapt out from the doorway, and this was that new song they were singing. The long-haired preachers come out every night and try to tell you what's wrong and what's right. But when asked about something to eat, they will answer in voices so sweet. You will eat by and by in that glorious land in the sky. Way up high, work and pray, live on hay. You'll get pie in the sky when you die. That's a lie. Did you know that that's where the phrase pie in the sky came from, was Joe Hill's song? Even Republicans use it now, but that's where it came from. Now, Joe, of course, was shot November 19th, 1915 for writing rebel songs. He was shot by the state of Utah, murdered by a firing squad. But these are his songs. These are our folk songs. Like On Top of Old Smoky or Down in the Valley, you just don't hear them as often, do you? Probably because they're a little more threatening. I was never awful threatened by Down in the Valley myself, but they are our legacy, they are our songs, so you probably ought to learn to sing it, don't you think? All right, it's done Baptist style. Any Baptists here? Good, you know what I mean then. It's answer back, I sing a line out, you sing it back, and then we sing one together. You will eat. Probably a little more conviction there. You're being into that microphone there. You will eat.
You will eat.
By and by.
By and by.
In that glorious land in the sky. No. Well, in that glorious land in the sky. Way up high.
Way high.
Work and pray. Live on hay. You'll get pie in the sky when you die. Yeah, real loud on that last part, Let them know you're pissed. Just test down to your socks. And the Starvation Army, they play. And they shout and they clap and they pray. When they've got all your coins on the drum, they will tell you and you're on the bum. You will eat. By and by, in that glorious land in the sky, work and pray, live on hay. You'll get pie in the sky when you die. That's a lie. Oh, That was wonderful. Oh, holy rollers and jumpers come out, and they roll and they jump and they shout. I'll give your money to Jesus, they say, and you'll eat on that glorious day. You will eat by and by in that glorious land in the sky. Work and pray, and live on hay. You'll get pie in the sky when you die.
That's a lie.
Working folks of all countries unite. Side by side we for freedom shall fight. When this world and its wealth we have gained, at the rafters we'll sing this refrain. You will eat by and by, when you've learned how to cook and how to fry. Chop some wood, do you good, and you'll eat in that sweet by and by. That's no lie. Hey, Joe. I love hearing those songs sung, you know. I talked to old Bert Russell there in Harrison Flatside Hall. He remembers 1,000 unemployed loggers in an open field because they couldn't get a hall to meet in, singing that song at the top of their lungs, and who normally spoke 12 or 14 different languages. Imagine what it must have sounded like, must have been like. Yeah, that is our music. That sure is our music. Part of my job, as I define it, and I define my job, you know, I own the means of my production. I only play for people I like, kind of a one-man worker's paradise. Yeah. Try it out. Feels great. Is to seek out the elders in my union, seek out the radical elders, people who led those extraordinary lives that can't be lived again, to pull them back into an active political life, and so they don't feel lost or left out. In exchange for which to give me songs and stories and poems to put back into the hopper, you know, to cycle back through. Some ideas, a story about one of those, I think one of the most extraordinary. Some of you may have met him, San Francisco Phil Melman. Well, that was on the skids in San Francisco. Phil Melman was an immigrant, Galapagos trade, a German immigrant. His birth was in Astoria, up further up the coast. That was in the waning days of the square-rigged ships, up into, the teens of this century. They'd stop at the Galapagos and take bird poop back to Germany for fertilizer seed, nitrate trades. Well, they needed top fallers in the western forest to get up and top off the big trees so they wouldn't shiver when they were felled, you know. Well, where do you find people that are unafraid of working at great heights? Well, they're in the rigging on the ships. So the sailors moved into the forest. There was a time when your rite of passage in the western forest was to be able to sit in the bunkhouse and sing all the verses to the flying cloud. See? And I learned that song from loggers. I didn't learn it from shantymen, you know. Well, Melman was one of those. He moved into the forest. First job he got, he took out the red card in the IWW. Well, of course, in those days, that red card was your ticket on the freight trains. They wouldn't throw you off for vagrancy if you had the red card because they belonged to the Railroad Brotherhood. See, they were Union brothers and sisters. Well, of course, then he got serious about it and became an organizer. Well, he was good at it, too. He was so good at it, they threw him in jail. 5 years, hard time, San Quentin Federal Penitentiary, 1920 to 1925. Criminal syndicalism bust. He was a political prisoner, like thousands of others during those times. He did his time and he got out, and then he disappeared. Nobody knew where he was. He vanished as though he'd never lived. I was talking to his cellmate in Chicago about 1975, Fred Thompson, who edited our newspaper for many years. Old Fred Thompson said, "Little Phil Melman was sure a great soapbox orator. We could use a fellow like that. You're traveling out west now and singing in places. Why don't you see if you can nose him out?" Well, I started asking questions. Began to hear persistent rumors of Phil Melman on the skids on the Mission in San Francisco. And yeah, we found him. Little cold water walk up flat with a bare wire bulb. When he found Phil Melman, he thought that he was the last living wobbly. He thought that everybody else was dead or in jail or had given up. But given that he thought he was the last one. That old man every May Day, which is Labor Day if you got any sense, every May Day, He would go down he'd take a soapbox, take an end unit, change trains. He'd make his way painfully. He was an old man with that box up to San Francisco State University, get out where the students were flowing past, sporting their books like young asses, the way La Montagne said. He would put up that soapbox. He'd get painfully up on the box and start piping at them, squeaking, yelling, hollering, caterwauling. They would just continue to flow past. They thought he was just a pathetic old fool. Well, I had a car in San Francisco, and every May Day for some years I made sure I was there to pick up Phil Melman and take him in his box up there to the college. I had my guitar, so I could do it old style. I'd sing those old wobbly songs as loud as I could, Power in the Union, Pie in the Sky. I'd chill up a crowd of maybe 100, 200 students in a big donut. As soon as I got them together, I'd put up that soapbox, and I'd say, okay, Melman, go get them. But by that time, he was kind of backed up, like bad plumbing, you know. There was a lot in there that had been on hold for years, and it all came out at once. It was phenomenal, like a machine gun. I could hear him. Fellow workers, the industrial workers of the world is going to organize the entire working class. What is the working class? Fellow workers, by the working class is anybody that works for wages and has a boss. You got a boss and you're working for wages, you're in the working class. Doesn't matter your college professor or ditch digger, you better be proud of it. While the middle class is just a joke made up of the bosses to keep us fighting against each other. Now, the industrial workers of the world is going to organize the working class into one big union of all skilled, semi-skilled, unskilled workers in one big union, the OBU. Got the OBU, we'll have a general strike. Strike like that lasts about half an hour. Then we'll take this thing apart and put it together so it makes more sense. With the means of production in the hands of the producers, produce for use instead of profit, create abundance for workers and nothing for parasites. Thank you. Well, he was pure hell, Phil Melman. But you know, you slow that down a little bit, and you ponder on a lifetime of Melman's experience, you know. I heard him do that a dozen times before I finally slowed it down. And what he said was that the working class is anybody that works for wages and has a boss. How many of you? Huh? How many of you? See? Working for wages, you got a boss, you're in the working class. That the middle class was a joke made up by the bosses to keep us fighting against each other. The working class is defined not by income level, but by your relationship to the means of production. What has happened, you know, think back to Melman, what has happened when we let the politicians, the defenders of the middle class, a political candidate says, I'm upholding the middle class. The middle class is beleaguered every time they pass a new tax. Who are they talking about? They're talking about the part of the working class that's employed and pitting it against the part of the working class that isn't employed. All right? See? Working class has nothing to do with income level. That slides. Who's in control of that, huh? It's a worthless definition. It's defined by your relationship to the means of production. If you're just selling your labor, if you don't own the tools you're using, you don't own the machine you sit at, you don't own the building you're working in, you're only selling your labor energy to get back a paycheck, and you got a boss, you're in the working class, period. College professor, ditch digger, doesn't matter. You're in the working class. Now, have you got that straight? When your politicians come at you, you know, that say, you're the middle class now, you tell them go to hell. See, say, the people who are unemployed on the skids, the homeless, they're in the working class, you're in the working class, you have interests in common, because that could be you, okay? We got to stop being divided up against each other. And not only that, we got to look forward to a time, move forward to a time, when that working class is not just built along narrow nationalist lines. Nationalism is just another tool to keep us divided. The capitalists use nationalism to pit American workers against Japanese workers. Oh, those little yellow people. I used to hear that in the Second World War. I don't want to hear that anymore. You know, they sneak into the factory in the morning and say, let's put it to the American workers. What? No, it's not going on. We're going to work toward using the tools of international communication that capital has used to internationalize. They use it well. Why aren't we using it in the American labor movement? Huh? To stop addressing the needs of the Democratic Party and start addressing the needs of labor globally. Make sure that Japanese and American auto workers belong to the same union. Make sure that garment workers in Korea and Singapore belong to the same union as the Amalgamated and ILGWU. Okay, one big union of all skilled, semi-skilled, and unskilled workers in one big union. And then everybody put their hands in their pockets and we see who really has the power. All right. Got that? Good. Melman told me that. Take it down. I especially appreciate the opportunity at the festival here to get into a different kind of music that belongs to all of us. It's our shared common cultural experience, the culture of labor. Where did all this stuff come from? You know, well, work created it. Workers created it. We just don't get any credit for it. But we do have a workers' culture. We have our music. We have our song. We have our stories. We have our dances, you know. We just never got it in school. Did you? I went to school. I got through high school somehow, took American history, and in my American history, U.S. history class, I got the history of the industrialists, the generals, and the presidents who didn't get caught. I got the history of the people who own the wealth, but none of the history of the people that created. So I went out to get a job to sell my labor energy for a paycheck and to take on a boss, you know, armed with somebody else's class history, right? I couldn't figure out what was happening to me. You know, I had to go to my elders to get my own history back, to get it back. See, that's how I'm doing what I'm doing. You know, these are honor songs. These are honor stories, just like Native Americans had. You know, this is my inheritance, you know. And I really so much appreciate, I can't thank you enough for the opportunity to share it with you all in a setting like this.
Thank you.
I know sometimes it sounds like I complain a lot, but there's a lot to complain about. It is desperately important that our children in our schools be taught our history by our teachers. How many teachers do I know who have been discharged because they taught their students to ask questions? Which is what every good teacher does. The teacher asks questions, and had the principal say, these kids have got to go out and get a job. Their employers want kids, people who have answers, not people who ask questions. So just teach the answers. The opposite of what every good teacher knows. Okay, what we're up against is the school system is run by a business. Who can afford to run for the school board? You know, who gets appointed to it? The business community. And who's in charge of curriculum formulation? Who does textbook selection? You know, where's your working class history in your textbooks? It's because the schools, with their straight lines, their authority figure in the front, replicate the assembly line further down the line. The working situation, one's an extension of the other. There was a young woman carrying a sign during a demonstration at the Lawrence textile strike. And the photographer took a picture of it. It was in the newspaper. The sign said, "We want bread, yes, but roses too." So that was the song that came right out of it shortly afterward. As we come marching, marching in the beauty of the day, a million darkened kitchens, 1,000 mill lofts gray, are brightened by the beauty a sudden sun discloses. And the people hear us singing bread and roses, bread and roses. As we come marching, marching, we battle tooth for men, for they are in this struggle, and together we can win. Our lives shall not be sweated from birth until life closes. Hearts can starve as well as bodies. Give us bread, but give us roses. As we come marching, marching, 100 million dead go crying through our singing their ancient cry for bread. Small art and love and beauty, their drudging spirits knew. Yes, it's bread we fight for, but we fight for roses too. As we come marching, marching, we're standing proud and tall. The rising of the women is the rising of us all. No more the drudge and idler tend that toil where one reposes, but a sharing of life's glories, bread and roses, bread and roses, bread and roses.
Hey, Utah Phillips. What do you think? Utah Phillips for president.